London, torrential rain. William Thompson, 42 years old, CEO of a $500 million property empire, disguises himself as a taxi driver for a mad bet with his business partner. But when the first passenger of the day gets in, his world collapses. It's Victoria, his wife of 15 years, who doesn't know she's in her husband's taxi. During this 20-minute journey to the airport, Victoria will make a phone call that will destroy William forever. She'll confess the betrayal, reveal she's running away with her lover, taking all the money from the offshore account, and most importantly, tell a truth about their daughter Charlotte that will shatter William's heart into 1,000 pieces. William Thompson stared at the ceiling of his suite on the third floor of the Georgian mansion in Kensington at 5:30 in the morning, unable to sleep. At 42, he owned a property empire worth $500 million. Skyscrapers, shopping centers, luxury residential complexes spread across London and the home counties. His signature was etched on half of London that mattered. Yet this November morning, he felt emptier than one of his vacant properties. The previous evening, he'd had a devastating argument with James Morrison, his business partner for 10 years. William had proposed increasing rents by 15% on a council housing estate in Tower Hamlets. James had protested that families were already struggling to pay. William's cold response had been that they should find somewhere else if they couldn't afford it. James had looked at him with disgust, accusing him of becoming an alien in his own world. He didn't know how much a coffee cost, what a worker earned, how ordinary people lived. When had he last taken the tube, done the shopping, spoken to someone who wasn't his barber or tailor? From that argument was born the most absurd bet of William's life: a week as a taxi driver. If he could manage to last 7 days driving ordinary people, listening to their problems, earning what they earned, James would give him £100,000. If he gave up earlier, William would donate $1 million to Oxfam. Now, at 6 in the morning, he was preparing for what would be the most surreal week of his life. In the Carrara marble-clad bathroom, he looked at himself in the mirror while putting on clothes he'd never owned. Worn leather jacket, faded jeans, gray trainers. He'd grown a 3-day beard and bought a worn cap. He was unrecognizable. The transformation wasn't just physical. As he descended the stairs of his Georgian mansion, 800 square meters spread over 4 floors, worth $20 million, William reflected on how estranged he'd become from his own life. Victoria, his wife of 15 years, slept in the suite on the 2nd floor. They hadn't shared the same bed for 8 months. She said he snored too much. He needed peace to work better. The truth was, they could no longer be in the same room without arguing or, worse still, ignoring each other. Charlotte, their 13-year-old daughter, had her kingdom on the 1st floor. Bedroom with dressing room, private study, and small lounge for watching TV. She was an intelligent and lively child, but she too seemed increasingly distant. When William managed to dine at home, perhaps 3 times a week, Charlotte told him about school with politeness, but no enthusiasm, as if she were talking to an uninteresting guest. The Thompson family lived like 3 luxury flatmates in a 5-star hotel. They had everything money could buy, but nothing that truly mattered anymore. William had hired a black cab from a company in Southwark. The owner, a middle-aged Londoner, had only accepted his invented story, actor preparing for a role, after seeing a $50,000 deposit. The interior smelled of cheap air freshener and cold cigarettes, an alien universe for someone used to the leather interiors of his Bentley. The first call came at 7:15, an executive who needed to get to Heathrow. Throughout the journey, the man was on the phone complaining about traffic, cost of living, stress of business travel. William recognized himself in those words and felt a strange compassion for himself. The second customer was Margaret, a 70-year-old lady heading to Guy's Hospital for an oncology consultation. She lived on an $800 pension, had sold her car because she could no longer afford petrol and insurance. During the journey, she told him her son worked in Manchester and couldn't visit often, that she was afraid of the tests but couldn't afford to postpone them. William only charged her half the fare, inventing a senior discount. The third customer was Oliver, an economics student at the London School of Economics. He paid the minimum fare by collecting coins from the bottom of his rucksack, apologizing for not being able to leave a tip. He shared a 40-square-meter flat with 3 other students, worked weekends in a restaurant to finance his studies, while his parents, small shopkeepers in Yorkshire, went into debt to support him in London. His determination made William feel incredibly small. For the first time in years, William felt connected to something authentic, real, human. It was 8:45 when the radio call changed everything forever. A pickup at Sloane Street, 23, single-passenger destination, Heathrow Airport. William felt his blood freeze. Sloane Street 23 was his address, his home. As he drove home, his heart began to race. Who could have called a taxi from his house at this hour? Victoria had her Range Rover in the garage. Charlotte was at school. The housekeeper arrived at 9:00. He parked outside the Georgian townhouse from the 1820s that he'd renovated 10 years earlier. At 8:55, the door opened and William's world collapsed. Victoria emerged with elegant and determined movements. She wore a black bespoke suit he'd never seen, hair pulled back in a sophisticated chignon. She was pulling a brown Louis Vuitton suitcase, the largest in their collection, and carrying the $40,000 Hermès bag from their 10th anniversary. Her makeup was perfect despite the early hour. Victoria looked like a woman on a mission, someone who had made an important decision and had no intention of turning back. She approached the taxi in her Louboutin heels without even looking at the driver. To her, he was just any taxi driver. She asked to be taken to Heathrow Terminal 5. She had a flight at 10:30 and needed to be there by 10:15. William pulled his cap down and modulated his voice to make it rougher. In the rearview mirror, he saw Victoria's profile, tense but determined. After 15 years of marriage, he knew every one of her expressions, but he'd never seen this one. A million questions exploded in his head. Where was she going? Why didn't he know anything about this trip? Why this enormous suitcase? As he joined the London traffic, Victoria took her phone from her bag. William's senses were on maximum alert. He didn't know that what he was about to hear would destroy his life forever. Victoria dialed a number William didn't recognize. When someone answered, her voice changed completely, becoming sweet and sensual, a tone William hadn't heard for years. She began speaking, calling her caller darling, explaining she was in the taxi and would arrive in 40 minutes. Then she added the phrase that made William's world collapse. He hadn't noticed anything. That poor fool had already left when she woke up. William gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned bone white. His wife was talking to another man, calling him a poor fool. But the worst was yet to come. Victoria continued, revealing she'd emptied the Swiss account that morning at 6 o'clock. 3.2 million was already transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands. William wouldn't notice for at least a week when the accountant did the monthly checks. By then, they'd be far away in their new life. That account was their emergency fund, savings from 15 years of marriage and 20 years of work. Money William had put aside for Charlotte, for their future, for their security. Money Victoria had just stolen while he slept in the next room. Victoria laughed as she told how William was so obsessed with his business that he noticed nothing. She described the previous evening. He'd returned at 11, eaten his usual sandwich in front of the computer, and gone to bed without even saying hello. It was true. William knew it. But did this justify betrayal? Theft? The destruction of a family? Victoria continued describing their marriage as a golden prison, surrounded by luxury, but without love, without passion, without real life. William had given her everything money could buy, but had forgotten to give himself. The most terrible thing was that she was right. Then Victoria said something that stopped time. Charlotte had the right to know who her real father was. William's hands began to shake uncontrollably. Charlotte, his little girl, his princess, wasn't his daughter? Victoria continued, telling how Charlotte had been conceived in Brighton 14 years ago, when William was on business in Japan and she was with her lover. William remembered perfectly. He'd had to travel to Tokyo for a crucial deal. Victoria had said she had flu and wanted to stay in bed. She'd even sent him photos of herself, pale and suffering. He'd felt guilty all week for leaving her alone. Instead, Victoria had gone to Brighton with David. Charlotte was born exactly 9 months later. In the rearview mirror, William saw Victoria talking with bright eyes, completely unaware that the taxi driver was the man she was destroying. Had 15 years of marriage been a lie? 13 years of fatherhood an illusion? Victoria hung up and called Charlotte to tell her she had to travel for work. This too was a lie. She would never return. She was abandoning not only William, but also Charlotte, the little girl who still called Daddy, a man who was now discovering he wasn't her biological father. During the brief conversation, Charlotte spoke of him with affection, about his generosity, how he could never say no to her. William felt his heart break. When Victoria hung up after saying goodbye to Charlotte, William saw her wipe away a tear. Perhaps she still had a heart. Perhaps leaving Charlotte hurt her, but evidently not enough to stop her. Victoria made another call to the law firm to confirm the divorce papers were ready for Monday morning. The grounds? Irreconcilable differences. 15 years reduced to a bureaucratic formula. They arrived at Heathrow. William parked and turned off the engine. He turned to Victoria, asking for $48. Victoria took out $50 from the wallet he'd given her, telling him to keep the change. She was about to get out when William, in an impulse that would change everything, asked if she was married. Victoria hesitated.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Then admitted she was, but not for much longer. William insisted, asking if she had children. A daughter of 13, Victoria replied with a broken voice. When William asked if she was abandoning her, Victoria became suspicious of these strange questions. That's when William removed his cap and turned completely towards her. These are the questions your husband would have asked you, Victoria, if you'd given him the chance. Victoria saw William's face and turned white as a corpse. Victoria could only whisper William's name, incredulous. Her handbag slipped from her nervous hands, scattering makeup, documents, and keys across the seat. She couldn't understand how it was possible that her husband was there, disguised as a taxi driver. William explained the bet with James, how he wanted to understand ordinary people, without imagining the first lesson would be discovering his wife was a fraud and his daughter wasn't his daughter. He got out of the taxi and ordered Victoria to get out too. They found themselves in the Heathrow car park, with hundreds of travelers running to their flights, unaware of the drama playing out beside this black cab. William began methodically reconstructing the truth from 14 years ago. The business trip to Tokyo, Victoria, feigning flu, the fake photos, his guilt. Instead, she'd gone to Brighton with David, and that week, Charlotte had been conceived. For 13 years, William had raised a little girl believing she was his daughter. He'd loved her more than his life, participated in every important moment, protected her from the world. Victoria knew she wasn't his. Every single day, for 13 years. William took out his phone and played Victoria the recording of her call. He'd recorded everything. The conversation with David, the one with the lawyers, the one with Charlotte. He had proof of the theft, the betrayal, everything. Victoria collapsed against the taxi, asking what he wanted from her. William wanted the complete truth. Who was David? How long had it lasted? And most importantly, did she really want to abandon Charlotte? That little girl, whether his biological daughter or not, didn't deserve to lose her mother. Victoria confessed that David Sterling was her divorce solicitor, They'd fallen in love 2 years ago. At first it was just attraction, then it became something more. William listened to 2 years of lies, while Victoria tried to justify herself with their marriage problems. Him always at work, her feeling lonely, lack of communication. When William asked her directly if she wanted to abandon Charlotte, Victoria burst into tears. She didn't want to abandon her, but how could she look her in the eyes, knowing what she'd done? How could she stay married to William, knowing that every time he looked at Charlotte, he'd think she wasn't his daughter? William declared he could forgive the betrayal and even the money, but he couldn't forgive that she'd decided to destroy Charlotte without giving her a voice. The little girl had the right to choose, to know the truth and decide what to do. It wasn't for them to decide for her. Victoria's phone rang. It was David. William told her to answer on speakerphone. It was time he also met the man who had destroyed his family. David was nervous and impatient, wanting to know where Victoria was. She should have been there 20 minutes ago. The flight left in half an hour. When Victoria tried to express doubts, David became irritated. They'd planned everything. The money was transferred. He'd already left his chambers. Victoria asked about Charlotte, but David dismissed the matter cynically. Children adapt. And anyway, it wasn't as if she was really William's daughter. David knew, too. Victoria had shared their family's most intimate secret with her lover. When Victoria asked what would happen if William discovered everything, David laughed sarcastically. He described William as a workaholic, so obsessed with his business that he wouldn't notice even if the house caught fire. Then he revealed he'd also left wife and children for Victoria, Alexander 16 and Emma 14. Victoria didn't know they would suffer too. The conversation became increasingly aggressive when Victoria asked what would happen if she didn't board the plane. David exploded, revealing the cruelest truth. He needed that money because he had debts of $500,000 to dangerous people. His chambers were going bankrupt. His wife wanted a divorce and would take everything. David's final confession was devastating. He admitted Victoria was a fantastic woman, but he needed her money. Victoria had just been a lifeline for a man drowning in debt. Victoria looked at William with tear-filled eyes, understanding she'd been used and manipulated. In a cold voice, she told David to go to hell and hung up. He admitted she'd been stupid. William agreed without mincing words, but focused on what was important. The money could be recovered, the betrayal could be forgiven, but Charlotte deserved to know the truth and decide if she wanted her mother to stay in her life. Victoria agreed to return home and tell Charlotte everything that evening, aware of the risk that the little girl might hate her. William established that Charlotte came before everything, before his pride, before Victoria's fear, before their marriage. As they headed to the car park to go home, William's phone rang. It was Charlotte's headmaster. The little girl had fallen down the stairs and been taken to the A&E at St. Bartholomew's Hospital for checks. William ended the call and looked at Victoria, who'd heard everything. In that moment, seeing the genuine fear in Victoria's eyes for Charlotte, William understood something fundamental. Whatever had happened between them, Victoria truly loved that little girl. They ran to the hospital in silence. In the taxi, Victoria wept while William drove through London traffic. When they arrived at Bart's, they found Charlotte sitting on an A&E trolley with a plastered arm, but smiling. Charlotte shouted with joy seeing both parents, surprised that Mummy was already back from her trip. Victoria ran to her and hugged her tight, too tight, until Charlotte protested, laughing that it hurt. It was just a broken arm, she said. She wasn't going to die. She was even excited because the plaster was pink, her favorite color. William approached and stroked Charlotte's hair. In that moment, looking at this little girl who was smiling despite the pain, he understood an absolute truth. It didn't matter whose DNA it was. Charlotte was his daughter. He'd raised her, loved her, lived every day of her life. She was his, and always would be. The doctor confirmed everything was fine. Just a simple radial fracture, 6 weeks in plaster, and she'd be as good as new. She was a lucky little girl. William looked at Charlotte and thought that yes, despite everything, she really was lucky. They returned home in the afternoon. Charlotte was enthusiastic about her pink plaster and wanted all her friends to sign it. While Victoria helped her settle on the sofa, William prepared dinner. It was strange. For the first time in months, they felt like a family again. After dinner, while Charlotte watched TV, William and Victoria sat on the terrace to talk. They knew they still had to tell Charlotte the truth, but not that night. She'd already had enough emotions. Victoria asked William how he'd take it if Charlotte wanted to meet David. William admitted he'd take it very badly, but if that's what Charlotte wanted, he'd support her. When Victoria asked if they could rebuild something for Charlotte, William set his conditions. Never any more lies, return of all the money, couples therapy for all three, and if Charlotte decided she wanted Victoria to leave, she'd have to go without argument. At that moment, Charlotte appeared on the terrace with her pink plaster and unicorn pajamas, asking if she could sleep in the big bed because her arm hurt. William and Victoria looked at each other and smiled. Of course she could. That night, they all three slept in the marital bed for the first time in months. Charlotte in the middle, William and Victoria on the sides. For that night, everything else could wait. The next morning, William found a note from Victoria on the bedside table. She'd gone to return the money and sort out legal matters. That evening, they'd talk to Charlotte, and whatever she decided would be the right thing. The note ended with a confession. She still loved him, even if she perhaps didn't deserve to anymore. William looked at Charlotte, who was still sleeping with tousled hair and a serene smile on her face. In that moment, he understood that whatever happened, Charlotte was his daughter and he was her father. DNA didn't matter. Love did. 3 months later, the Thompson family had found a new balance. Victoria had returned all the money and begun individual therapy to understand how she could have destroyed everything most dear to her. William had drastically reduced his working hours, delegated more responsibilities, and devoted real time to his family. Charlotte had received the truth about her paternity with a maturity that surprised both parents. After the initial shock and many tears, she'd looked William in the eyes and told him that for her, he'd always be her daddy, because being a father meant much more than sharing DNA. She'd chosen not to meet David, at least for now, saying she already had a perfect daddy. William and Victoria hadn't returned together as husband and wife, but they'd learned to be a family again. They lived in the same house, but in separate rooms, united by love for Charlotte and the will to rebuild trust day by day. In the evenings, when William returned from work at 8 instead of 11, he found Victoria and Charlotte waiting for him for dinner. They talked, laughed, planned the weekend. Charlotte had signed the plaster with the phrase William had framed in his office. Real families are recognized by the heart, not by blood. Oh, looking at his daughter, because Charlotte was, and always would be, his daughter. William understood that sometimes you have to lose everything to understand what really matters. True love isn't measured in millions of pounds or professional success. It's measured in smiles at breakfast, hugs before sleep, hands that clasp in difficult moments. And love, the authentic kind, always finds a way to triumph. If this story moved you, leave a like, share in the comments. Do you believe a parent's love goes beyond biological connection? Have you ever had to forgive a betrayal that seemed unforgivable? Subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that show how sometimes the biggest crises can become new beginnings. Remember, true family isn't just blood, but heart. And authentic love always finds a way to triumph.